shortly introduce Egon, although most of you know him. Egon van den Broek got his master's in 2001 in artificial intelligence from Radboud University Nijmegen. And he did his first PhD from the same university in 2005 in social sciences. And then he did a second PhD in University of Twente on affective signal processing in 2011. And both of them are extremely interesting topics. He works on human-centered AI and affective computing. So, Egon, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Albert, for the introduction. So this talk is on human-centered signal processing while being at the human-centered computing group of Judith Masthoff. Oh, okay. So for those who do not know me, this is me. Normally you would have seen me like this in a pre-corona time. But now we heavily depend on computer-mediated communication, which is of interest to the topic of today. So with a normal presentation, I would interact with you via speech, but also other audio fragments likely, and with facial expressions, body movements. I would try to make visual contact with you, which is now all not possible. And in between question answering is also quite hard. So now we have my speech and obviously the slides, and we have a chat box, although please do not use it during the talk, because then I have to do task switching, which is not nice. We are, instead of transmitting multiple signals and you are receiving multiple ones, there's essentially only one, that is my speech. So the content of this brief talk will be slightly more on the topic. Then I want to discuss systems, the model I generally use, 3 example studies. I want to say something about artificial intelligence. I wanted to say more, but we lack the time, I'm afraid. And of course, I end with conclusions. So first, the topic. So human-centered. Why human-centered? So human-computer interaction is human-centered. Pattern recognition is or can be human-centered. At least often there's inspiration from humans in pattern recognition. And we as humans ourselves also apply continuously pattern recognition. Well, expert systems are also typically human-centered, and a lot of applications are human-centered, like playing a game, driving a car, medical diagnostics, and so forth. And with computing science going from an expert domain towards everyday life for almost all of us, it tends to get more and more personalized, contextual, and we hope intuitive, and in time perhaps empathic. So all human-centered. So why the signal processing? So you can say computing is omnipresent, but we definitely could also say that of signal processing. Whether we talk about computers, television, cell phones, all kinds of machinery, sensors, actuators, the Internet of Things, which is some kind of a hype. It is all on signal processing, not only on computing. And of course, also in nature is providing us a lot of signals, like with, for example, the climate change. But let's concentrate on humans. So this is the cortical homunculus. So we perceive, we have a lot of senses and a lot of actuators as well. And they allow us to process and generate a lot of signals, which are strikingly complex. So, for example, handwriting. So we can process that online and offline. So without or with the time element, either as a time series or as images. We can also process images, which are essentially 2D signals. And we can even consider text as a signal, which has properties like complexity, structure, and we can calculate entropy from text. So all signals, they are omnipresent. And what I like to do is focus on the common aspects instead of the differences between signals. So then on systems, why systems? Well, William James made a say about that more than 125 years ago. So essentially he said men are machines. So this must do an appeal to especially people in artificial intelligence, I suppose. So say that a psychologist says that, that's interesting, because then we can take an engineering and a formal perspective towards humans, which I will do. So let's assume we have a very basic system, a communication system. It gets an input signal, it processes it, and it generates an output signal. So this is our, say, our foundation. So such a system ideally should satisfy some properties. And I selected 6. It's slightly debatable, but these are the most prominent one. So one is stability. We want stable systems, systems on which we can rely. So stability is studied from various angles, especially in engineering, and that has its reasons, because if it fails, you have a lot of problems. Here you see a bridge. It's a famous example. And the bridge doesn't look good. It's almost like it's making a slow wave. And it did, and after that it collapsed. So perhaps a bit closer to our fields of research. This is what we want stability. So we want a bounded input and a bounded output for a system. And another example is our ECG, our electrocardiogram, our heart rate. Obviously, that should be relatively stable. So, and we can use knowledge from our heart rate, from our ECG, to determine the M's denoted here. So that the value should not go beyond a certain positive number, a finite positive number. So your heartbeat cannot go up to 300 beats per minute, for example. Systems can also have a memory. So a famous one is a moving average system, which takes the current input and of the two previous timestamps and divides it. So but you can also build systems without memory, obviously, which is given below. The third system property is causality. So we can again take the moving average system, which is causal. We can have another. I have an echo.
Thank you.
Okay, please shut down the mic. So we have another moving average system, but that is not causal because it uses something, uses information from the future. So not only the current timestamp and one preceding that, but also the timestamp after that. The fourth system property is invertibility. So then simply an input should be recoverable by the system. So we have an inverse function, and this in practice is very hard, and even here with a simple toy example, we see that it's very hard to build such systems. So here the system without memory with x squared is provided. So with a certain output, we cannot determine for sure whether the input was 5 or -5. Another, say from a psychological perspective, if you want to build a system with forecast burnout and you want to revert that process, that is, as far as we now know, not possible, simply because we do not understand how the system of getting a burnout and rewinding that has to be made. So then two very important system properties which I take together is linearity and time invariance. So I suppose it doesn't need much explanation. So linearity is the principle of superposition, so it has to satisfy additivity and homogeneity. And time invariant means that no matter at what time, given a certain signal, the system should provide the same output. So in practice, that often doesn't hold. So take an example from practice. Let's say our athlete, Dutch athlete Daphne Schippers, who runs 100 and 200 meters. So she will now have a different performance with the same training today than she had 10 years ago, or as she will have in about 10 years from now. So what I already denoted is that in practice, in real world signals, and a lot of my work is in the real world, it's not that nice. So in the ideal situation, we would have a linear time invariant system, and its analysis would be tractable. But often multiple properties are violated. So we have to find solutions, and several are available, but in practice, it's zooming in on the specific application at hand, at the specific signals to determine these solutions. But I will mention one. So for a non-stationary time series, you could do detrending, for example. But another way is building adaptive filters, because a linear time invariant system assumes fixed parameters, and therefore it cannot handle unexpected changes in the system. So for example, when you have your ECG, which we thought has a very nice morphological base, but when there are issues with the ECG, so people are sensitive to getting a heart attack or something, you have changes, and the statistical properties change, and the system still has to be able to handle that. So essentially, we can, how can we handle this? So in two ways. We can take a data-driven approach. So say, to put it bluntly, look at the signals. And we can take a knowledge-driven approach. So in the case of the ECG, so use the expert knowledge of the cardiologist. So that's nice, that's somewhat rounded up, but essentially we do not have one system, but we have multiple systems. We have human and machine interacting, or even multiple humans and multiple machines interacting. And they do so, as I already mentioned, using multiple input and often out multiple output signals. So in this case, I'm the transmitter, and I transmit my signals to multiple receivers, which are all of you. regrettably, I'm now only transmitting my audio and my slides, but that's it. But that becomes very complex, especially when we also have to take into account the complex where this is all realized. So how do we handle that? So I take in general the closed loop model. So this is the most horrible situation. So a person in a lab completely tagged up with all kinds of cameras and all kinds of sensors, and the main message is then just behave normally and do the task you are asked to do. So the question is whether that's an ecologically valid approach and how much that type of research helps us in the real world, where there are many more processes. So this is the closed loop model I generally use. So we have a human, we sense all kinds of signals, in most cases multiple ones. I often use biosignals like electrocardiogram, electromyogram, galvanic skin response or electrodermal activity, but also, for example, speech and signs and video camera. So we process these signals, we do a lot of signal processing, and we do pattern recognition. Based on that, we have an influencing algorithm which provides feedback. And we have some actuators which actually communicate that feedback to the human. And the loop is closed. And you can imagine that if you want to have an optimized state for the human, then at a certain moment it can be that the system takes no change in its actions, because the state of the human is already optimal. So the study that I conducted with a student was that he had an interactive game, was a first-person shooting game, and the players were tagged with all kinds of biosensors, and based on the experience level of stress, they received more ammunition than normally, or received a bigger gun, or less ammunition and a smaller gun, or more zombies popped up, or zombies popped up from another angle, and so forth. Because you want to get the player into a certain flow and keep him there as long as possible. So, and then you have such a closed loop. Another example was an augmented reality game in a swimming pool to attract more young people to the swimming pool, to have some body movement instead of only gaming. They were playing a video game using body language, and the game was projected on a screen, and in parallel there were all kinds of effects in the water and so forth. And they also try to aim at an optimal state, but then not of one person, but of a group of persons. So when we zoom in to the box, signal processing and pattern recognition, I would like to zoom into the signal processing part, obviously, and then especially to the pre-processing part, essentially. So to elaborate a bit more on how it works on practice, and to see this approach, that it works for a range of studies, I present 3 studies very briefly. So one is on biosignal processing. It was on electrodermal activity. What you see here is an image of a stock trader. So stocks, it's nice, it's time series, so we can do the analysis. The issue is that it's about a lot of money, and people have to stay concentrated and should not be influenced by emotions. So what we see here is a stock trader with a ball and the background where you see an enlarged image of, so in the middle with orange, yellow colors. And essentially it's a very fancy curved television, and it provides feedback on the emotional state of the stock trader to himself. And the same is with the bracelet, and it records biosignals. And from the biosignal is derived, is the stock trader in a stable emotional state, or is he getting stressed? And if so, perhaps he should reconsider his decisions. So here we have a reasonably stable situation with memory, and it's reasonably time invariant. It's not linear. Invertibility is always a problem, and causality is questionable. So how did we do it? So the foundation for this was a very nice piece of mathematics. That's the Hamburger theorem, or the moment theorem, that states that we can decompose a signal using statistical moments, a bit like we do with a Fourier analysis. And that then is the first moment mean, the second variance, the third skewness, and the fourth kurtosis, and so on. And with a limited set of these moments, we can already explain a lot of variance in the data. And with a set of only the first 4 moments, we could derive whether or not somebody got stressed or not. So this is a typical piece of signal processing, what we see here, and without machine learning. So, and it was a data-driven approach, just by looking at the signals, not by digging into much into the psychology or physiology of people, because that's quite complicated. So this is a simple scheme on the sweat glands that are tracked in this application, and this is the more complex thing, so which is quite a mess, and in practice impossible and not needed to implement. So another study, the audio signal, and a loudspeaker benchmark. So what a loudspeakers are built using anechoic room, so with an optimal room without any reflection from the wall or the ceiling or something. But in practice, people do not have such a room. They have a living room where the loudspeakers are put in. So is it ecological valid? Is it wise to build your loudspeakers in such a highly artificial environment? And can we perhaps build a model that can be used to be adapted for a personal situation, and that specific speakers can be selected for specific home situations? So that was very interesting, because obviously we had the input signal, so the music, the ideal input signal, but we also obtained a reference signal from the listener perspective, because we had an artificial head and torso model, so a real physical thing with ears on it, accurately modeled, with microphones on it, which provided us an objective reference signal. And in parallel, we asked listeners to subjectively determine the quality of the speakers. So in this way, we could relate objective and subjective loudspeaker preferences. And we did so in several listening positions, because that matters a lot as well, and in several rooms, including a kitchen, a living room, and a hallway. So this was quite nice, because it was quite stable, where we had the memory satisfied. It was it satisfied causality reasonably. It was up to a reasonable level, even invertible. We were able to make linear models and a satisfied time invariance. So then going to a 2D signal, it's on image retrieval. This is actually some old work with some nice algorithmics on the background. So a lot of things of humans are manifold. So one such thing is color perception. So it's perceptually uniform locally, but globally it isn't anymore. So you can apply a Euclidean distance in the suitable color space locally, but globally it doesn't make sense. So it's a complex space, the color space. So what we did here is a clear and knowledge-based approach. We used work from anthropology and linguistics, Berlin and Kay, who noticed that there were essentially 11 color categories that humans used in memorizing colors and when talking about colors. Perhaps you can recall it for yourself. So if you see the red Ferrari, you don't talk about 10 shades of red, it's red. So based on that principle, we asked people to label, using these 11 colors, a set of what is called the web-safe colors from the World Wide Web Consortium. They labeled these and it provided us data input, data points in the color space. So what we essentially did is cluster them, got some nice convex hulls, and we segmented the space using a distance transform, which by itself was some interesting work, which provided us essentially a Voronoi diagram. So in that way, we essentially could make a representation of the colors of an images using 11 bins instead of at that time thousands of bins. So that was a significant compression, which was knowledge based. So this is typically not a stable problem. Memory doesn't work because color memory is terrible. Causality is an issue. It's not invertible. It's definitely not linear. It's manifold, and it doesn't satisfy time invariance either. So this had a very interesting bycatch because we founded a class of adaptable distance transforms while developing this. So a short note on artificial intelligence before I conclude this presentation. So artificial intelligence primary goal is to build an intelligent machine. So the second goal is to find out about the nature of intelligence, you could say. So that's what I'm doing, but from a signal perspective. And from what you could say a cybernetics perspective, because you could claim that cybernetics is some sort of artificial intelligence, and it was definitely founded almost 10 years before artificial intelligence was founded. And with the Internet of Things, all kinds of sensors and so forth, it becomes, it's revivaled more or less. And the groundbreaking book of Norbert Wiener from 1948, essentially the second edition, but it was reprinted by MIT Press last year. So I highly recommend to read the book because it's perhaps more relevant than ever. Some conclusions. So I have 8 cornerstones, you could say, in my research. So I like glass boxes, not the deep learning, because it's a black box, which we do not understand really. I like real world work. So the images you see here are artificial images with textures and the cat on the background. That's from my first PhD. So preferably I don't do that anymore, or only in pilot studies. So as Broek stated, only experiments with real creatures and real worlds can answer the natural doubts about our approach. Time will tell. And it was an artificial intelligence magazine that he stated this. I'm very keen on having my research methods in order, because otherwise it's impossible to replicate empirical work. So I'm very much in favor of fair data. And on ethics, so the interesting thing is that in 1948, Wiener from cybernetics already warned for the dangers of computer technology. And he's very much right, I think. I just discovered a week ago that there's an Israeli company who has 29 patents filed, in which they rely in more than half the cases, I think, on work that I did. And I didn't intend my work for the purposes I think they will be using it. So that's very sad. We should be really careful. And further, I'm vice chair of our faculty's ethical review board. So in case you have any questions on ethics, please drop me a message. So I like pattern recognition very, very much, both from the machine and from the human side. I like active learning. I haven't looked into it in much depth so far, but I hope to do so quickly. And I still like just plain statistics. So what is human-centered processing, signal processing about? Transparent, interpretable algorithms, models of human signal processing, and improved man-machine interaction. That was the end. What you now see appearing is the algorithm used to segment the color space, the distance transforms, and here it's used for simulation of robot navigation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So how shall we do the questions? Maybe people can raise their hands and I can give them the word. That could be a possibility.
I can put my camera on. Perhaps that's an.
That will be nice, I think, that people see you, yes. Okay, any questions from the audience? Let me also check the... Okay, I can see one comment from Marce in this chat that man-machine interaction should be human-machine interaction so that the women are included.
Sorry.
That's valid. That's hard to counter. Sorry.
Well, the scientific language in that respect is changing, but it's changing slowly, right?
Yeah, so, but I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, any questions?
Okay.
Perhaps I can have a small question. The dynamic systems or nonlinear dynamics approach to modeling complex systems is very good, but it requires one to express the system mathematically so that it can be solved with difference and differential equations. And then you said you don't like the black box approaches, which is, of course, it makes sense, but when we have the complexity that we're dealing with makes it perhaps unwieldy to clearly model these systems through equations and still have an understanding of them. I mean, one of the figures you have shown gives us a very nice overview of the complexity of the interactions between the individual parts of these systems. And another example is the famous Van Essen diagram, which kind of shows the interactions between the modules in the visual system. It becomes very difficult to conceptualize and to grasp. Even if we could model them, let's say component by component, the system that we're producing is still going to be so complex that we're not going to be able to understand it. So what is the advantage of a let's say a white box as opposed to a black box modeling approach in this case?
You more or less answered the question yourself. Okay, so to solve some problems, for now we will need to adopt a black box approach. There's not another way. But then what often happens is with, say, explainable artificial intelligence, that then another model is built that can explain more or less the behavior of the black box model. And that doesn't help that much. So when we are solely engineering, we just want to have a solution, have a system working. That's fine, as long as it is stable, I would argue. But we then are missing still some, say, background knowledge, at least. So we have, there's just a sacrifice we have to accept.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Okay. Then this concludes this week's colloquium. Thank you very much for the large turnout, 75 people. I mean, this is, I think we're even more than the physical colloquiums at the moment. And we hope to see you all next week for the second colloquium of the semester. Thank you very much. Thank you, Egon, for the nice talk.
Thank you all for joining. Bye-bye.